Greetings, Earthlings. So we are still alive, and so is my cat Roger, who's just woken up. Perfect timing. So I think I'm gonna add her to the title. I think, Ronnie, because
Yeah, she seems to star quite frequently. Our cat's being fed at the moment, so I won't get one come to
yeah,
visit me just yet. I might later.
you might indeed. Yeah. Well, we've got quite a lot going on in the chat actually, Ronnie. So I don't know whether we want to break our rule and maybe we've got Lorraine, Edie. Does anyone get annoyed how they talk about veganism on daytime TV? I'm sure we would. They were praising King Charles for eating veggie twice a week and vegan once a week. Have you heard about that, Ronnie? Because I haven't.
I think
Not
I've
from the
vaguely heard
Republic
about
of
it. It's
Ireland,
a little bit
you know
like
what I mean?
praising someone saying that bloke's good, like he only mugs people 5 days a week, and the other days he abstains from mugging. So isn't he good?
Yeah, there's been a
bit
lot
like
of
that,
talk.
isn't it? You know.
Yeah, he's supposed to have a vegan chef or something now and all that, is he, or what?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, they have people to do everything, don't they? You know.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there was always a rumor, wasn't there? There was a rumor that he had somebody to put toothpaste on his toothbrush.
It wouldn't surprise me at all, because they used to have people to wipe their bum, didn't they? And it was called the groom of the stool. It was called the groom of the stool, and
All right.
that was the
And
the
I
person
never
who
saw
wiped
that job advertised at the job centre. So
wiped the king's arse, and it was
Yeah.
a very privileged. It was held to be a very privileged position if
I'm
you were
sure.
this groom of the stool.
I'm sure.
So whether he's got a groom of the stool, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me.
So apparently they're going for a vegetarian thing rather than a
So therefore it kind of would make no difference to either the environment nor other animals in terms of the harm it's going to do.
Yeah, well, this is the way it's going to go, though, you know, because even people who are concerned about the environment, they'll still resist veganism as much as possible, won't they? So anything other than that, they'll try to put in its place. So what about a little bit of reducitarianism? What about a little bit of flexitarian?
I think that's
case. What about vegetarianism? You
know. Yes. Even though, but of course, you know, my argument with people like that is, well, you know, what is the fundamental reason why, you know, humans have wrecked the environment? And for me, and I think, for everyone, it's speciesism, it's human supremacism. That's why that's why humans have done it, because there was no consideration given to the other animals that inhabit that environment.
No, indeed. Andy says that I haven't watched. Yeah, I don't have a TV. I haven't had one for ages and ages.
No, I don't. Well, I only watch it. We have a TV, and I only watch it when I pass it as I'm going through the room. I don't sit and watch it. Very rarely.
So anyway, welcome to the people already in the chat, and it's very active already. So we've got Lorraine, hello. BC is in there, and we've got Not Your Mum, Not Your Milk, Paul Atherley, hello there. Deb is in the house, and Kate J, Benny Malone, the author Benny Malone. Did you see that that video of a cow turning on? It was a tweet, and Benny kind of reposted it, and I made a video out of it. And basically, the farmer was describing what had happened, because a cow became violent towards, I think, his daughter or a young woman worker. I think it might have been his daughter. But he describes the cow as about 7 years old, or they've at least had her for 7 years, that she's calved every year for 7 years and was always very quiet, and then had this kind of bit of a violent turn, as it were. And he says in the thing, this is why you can't trust them, you know. I know, yeah. And,
I know.
So Benny said, well, you know, if you're a mother who's had your babies stolen from you on a regular basis, then maybe you might. Oh, is that true? All right. Oh, I look. Oh, this is somebody called Danny, right? And I thought she looked like a teenager, actually. Not that necessarily rules it out, I suppose.
Well, that's it. I mean, this is it's everything's turned on its head, isn't it? You know, like as soon as another animal, say, kills or harms a human, there's a big fuss, but nothing said about the massive numbers of those animals that are actually killed by humans.
Yeah,
like when a shark attacks someone.
Yeah, the shark thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
11.
yeah.
I wrote this down yesterday. Funny enough, 11,000 sharks killed every hour by humans. Right?
And yet you get a shark kill a human
Yeah,
or bite a
I
human,
know.
and there's like hell to play, isn't there?
When we've trespassed in their home, essentially.
Just keep out of their homeland. There's lots of other places to go. Just don't go in where they are. What's the problem? You know.
Right. Well, we've got a couple of related issues today, which we've put under this title. You can't just make it up, and so this is a modern day phenomena that I think we've both noticed. Certainly, I have, which is a reluctance and sometimes an opposition to learn about the history of the movement that you join, and to me that's a strange thing to do, because it seems to me almost a natural thing to do. Almost, I'm interested in this movement. Then you join it and you find out, oh, what's it all about? And if it's got a history, and especially if it's got a history as interesting as our movements, then you'd have thought that everybody would be interested in finding it out. Sadly, a lot of people aren't, and it's even worse than that. A lot of people are actually opposed to finding it out. And we were saying just before we came on, Ronnie, that whether it's something to do with the lack of reading of books now, maybe that was something to do with it, because I suppose we got a lot of what we know from our reading of books. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I became vegan because something I read, because of an article I read in a magazine. It was actually in the Vegetarian Science magazine, the article that caused me to go vegan. And yeah, I mean, the thing is that the founders of the vegan movement that really laid out what veganism actually is, they did that through the written word or the printed word. And if people these days are reluctant to kind of to read the printed word, and they want to they just want to go on YouTube all the time, then they're not gonna kind of see that stuff. I know you're making an effort now to put it on YouTube, and that's great, and that's really important. But by and large, it hasn't been on there. So people go on YouTube to find out what veganism is. They're gonna get people talking about veganism who themselves don't understand what it is. And that's the difficulty we face.
Yeah, we've always got a kind of problem that is being passed on really a little bit. And of course we do know, and I've certainly had this this suggestion that the vegan movement was started by Gary Yourofsky, and so once you've got that kind of level of unknowing, I'm not necessarily going to say ignorance, but then you've got a problem, because they say this kind of thing with a straight face, which is a real kind of problem. And I think that when we're hoping to get onto the politics of it shortly too, but really what we're talking about there then is that the lack of knowledge of the history has led to the animals only phenomena, which is, I suppose there was elements of that all the time, but there's been a big growth of it recently, and there's a big insistence within the movement now from a certain faction that veganism has got no relationship with human beings in terms of it's kind of grand kind of ideas about peace and all that, that it's just about other animals. And of course, historically, that's not true, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why there's been some reluctance to engage with the history, because once they started to look, they saw that what they thought veganism was, see, it's kind of bigger than what they thought, which is another interesting thing, because I thought they'd like that. Turned out that that's not necessarily the case. But one little caveat I think we ought to acknowledge, or at least I want to, is the fact that the founders of the movement, they're not kind of lawgivers. It's not as though everything they say is law. And in fact, some of it is quite old now and a little bit romantic. Leslie Cross, who is very central, and we'll come up to some of his quotes in a minute. He wrote in a very kind of flowery kind of way. He was a professional journalist, but none of them wrote in kind of polemic terms. None of them wrote in sound bites. And so picking out individual sentences in what they write is not great, although I've got a couple of memes which have done exactly that. But certainly in terms of when the animals only people have tried to say, oh, it's just about animals, and when they say animals, they mean other animals, then they pick out individual sentences. AV did that a few years ago. They picked out a single sentence from all the essays that Leslie Cross wrote and said, here's the definition of veganism. And of course, that then leads to a distortion of what's going on. But again, I always say that, one of the things that we learn with social movement theory is that social movements move, by which I mean evolve. And so their ideas move as well. And that is true, but there's a real risk in that. In social movement theory, they talk about a kind of career or a life path of a social movement from birth and kind of the early years, and then you've got this time which they call takeoff. And takeoff is when a lot of people get turned on to the idea and they all join. Lots of different people join, and that's the time. And Corey Lee Wren, sociologist, writes about this quite a lot. That's the time when the actual core values of the movement, the founding values, are under threat. Because you might, in the initial stage, when it was all small, have a lot of people who, by and large, were pretty much the same politically, and their outlook was pretty much the same. And then you get lots of people flooding in from all different walks of life, as it were, and that puts then the core values of any movement under strain. So that's the usual kind of pattern, and it has happened in the vegan movement, and there's no doubt about that. I don't think. I think that's pretty kind of obvious. So
yeah,
I
just say I think it's a question of just it's really based on deciding what the intentions were of the founders of veganism, and we arrive at that kind of decision through pretty much reading everything they wrote, don't we? It's what their intention actually was. What did they intend veganism to mean? And that's the kind of it's kind of sort of deciphering that, isn't it? That's important, because you kind of you can't make up. People can't make up what veganism is. It is what it is. If we're going to determine the meaning of veganism, it has to be really what was intended by the founders of the vegan movement, doesn't it? How could it be anything else?
Well, except with that caveat that movements do move, and so therefore their values might shift. My argument there is if you want to make a case for the values to shift, you need to know what the original values are in order then to say, well, that's what used to be. I mean, I always use the same example, which is Marx. People, became neo-Marxists and critical theorists, and they pulled away from the core values of Marx, especially because Marx is always split up into crude Marx and then later Marx, and they pulled away from that. But they knew what the original values were, and then they use that as a critique. What we've got in the vegan movement is that there's no reference to the original values. There's just a statement that this is what veganism is, and there's kind of like, there's no argumentation, there's nothing underneath it. It's just as though this is a fact, that veganism is animals only, always has been, and all that, and that is incorrect, you know. Yeah, I think I'll probably agree with that. The intention of the founders was to change human perceptions of other sentient animals, for humans to stop viewing other sentient animals as resources, slaves, commodities, and properties. I think you could sum it up by saying that there's a lot of things that they were against, and there's a lot of things that they were for. They were against oppression. They were against exploitation, in particular. That's a word that they use, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, I think, Ronnie.
Yeah.
So they talked about that. They even use now and again the word cruelty, and from the 1960s onwards, that word started to get used more. But they, generally speaking, talked about exploitation. So those are the things that they were against, and there were for things like peace and justice and non-violence. In particular, peace was a big one, as we'll see from some of the stuff that we're going to see. So this is like one of the summaries that I tend to use. This is 1964. This is Eva Batty, who was most famous for, I don't know, did you ever have any of her cookbooks, Ronnie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did back in the day. Yeah, I think every vegan did at one time.
I think so. I think they were, for the time, I think they were very modern, because I remember them having, you know, those kind of pages with the big slots in it, and then the round kind of plastic thing, so you could turn it over. And I think there were wipeable pages. So I think they were quite modern, as you know, and they're called What's Cooking and What Else is Cooking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she also did a pamphlet, which is, this is for, and so this is where you get a statement of the entanglements of the issue, and again, it's interesting because I always point out, because this is one that uses the word exploitation, and I always find it interesting that she's implying here that the soil can be exploited, which is quite interesting. And I think that we would normally say that the soil can be depleted or damaged, right, rather than exploited. But veganism is one thing and one thing only, a way of living which avoids exploitation, whether it be of our fellow men, the animal population, or the soil upon which we rely for our very existence. I've always rather would have hoped that the animal population would have been first in that little list, to be honest, but I think that kind of gives us our first starting point, if you like.
Yes, I mean, obviously it's other animals who are the most exploited. I don't know whether she meant it to kind of, you know, the importance of it was according to the order. I'm you know, I don't necessarily think that Eva actually would have meant that by that statement.
No, and in fact, knowing her other writing, it could have been the soil first, because she was, I mean, she basically, it was kind of like, I always make the point that the issue came back in the 80s, and there's a famous book called Diet for a New America by John Robbins. He's got a big summit coming up. I see all over social media at the moment. Food Revolution is group now, I think. But he was talking about soil depletion, topsoil, and we've really damaged the topsoil. And if topsoil gets irreparably damaged, then we're talking about a real kind of existential threat to humanity. And another one, and that's not even, well, it's related, but it's not even the same as climate change. So yet another kind of damage to our, you know.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, George Monbiot says a lot about that in his latest book with Genesis. Talks a lot about the importance of the soil and the structure of the soil and how it's a whole ecosystem that, you know, that we're destroying and that we have destroyed, and how important it is. So that's very much along these lines as well.
Yeah, David's saying that this idea of talking about the soil is distortion of Watson and Cross. Well, Catherine Janaway talks about it as well, but then we're into the 70s and 80s by then. So, well, is that an example of the evolution of the idea? That's an interesting one. The one that I pick out all the time, of course, is that this is one of my favorite quotes from Watson. Now, Watson wasn't trying to put forward a definition of veganism here. In fact, he was answering a question from somebody about bees and honey. And so he said the object of the vegan society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life, whether it is profitable to do so or not. And so I think that last bit is related to the direct question that he got asked. Because I've always said, well, you could read that as an anti-capitalist statement, but I don't really think it was that. But it's nice to think it would be. But certainly, if you were to take it up to the comma, that for me would be an adequate definition of veganism. Because one thing that Cross said, because he talked about the 9 words that made up the core definition. And he said the problem is these 9 words can't, I think he said, capture such a massive idea. And that is true. So I always get a little bit frustrated when during debates about something like veganism, people dive for the definitions, especially when they dive for the dictionary definitions, because the conversation is completely distorted right from the start. Then, once you do that.
You see that the problem for me with this is that opposition to exploitation isn't enough, because there are ways in which humans harm other sentient life, whether that be other animals or other humans, that are something other than exploitation. In other words, say, for instance, a woodland is destroyed in the process of creating a motorway, and that would mean that the habitat of other animals would be wrecked. Those animals would suffer and lose their lives accordingly. Well, that's not exploitation. That's not use, but it's still a wrongful act done by humans against other animals, and a harmful act done by humans against other animals. And of course, a huge example of that is the climate crisis. Obviously, a big part of the climate crisis is caused by exploitation, because it's caused by animal farming. But the aspect of the climate crisis that's caused, say, by the burning of fossil fuels, it doesn't amount to exploitation of other animals, although it results in tremendous harm to them. I mean, we've had an example that they've analysed the harm to other animals caused by the forest fires in Australia, and it's been estimated that 3 billion non-human animals were perished in those forest fires. Now, that wasn't exploitation, but I'd argue that's oppression. That's something done by humans that's resulted in.
Wasn't it a result of the exploitation of the natural world?
Well, it's a result of human activity that's harmed the natural world, and whether that amounts to exploitation, but it's not direct exploitation of the animals that live within the natural world. And I'd say that, you see, I prefer the word oppression to exploitation, because I think oppression can include exploitation, but it also includes other things that can't be defined as exploitation, but also cause harm. So I'm kind of, for me.
So you'd like oppression put in that?
Yeah, I think oppression would be better.
I mean, don't forget, we need to repeat the fact that Watson wasn't trying to come up with with the definition here. So he wasn't particularly kind of, kind of trying to be definitive by any means. The other interesting thing is this is August 45, and it was another 4 years before Leslie Cross said, we don't have a definition of veganism. We have a definition of the vegan diet, but not of veganism. And so that's going to be our next step. And when people say, well, why was that? Well, first of all, Watson was kind of almost like left up to do just about everything for the first 18 months to 2 years of the organization. But also some of the very early vegans became ill. They didn't know about B12 at the time. Also, a lot of people said that they were going to die. And so inevitably, the first task really, as they saw it themselves, was they thought that they needed to prove that human beings could exist without products derived from other animals, because that was against everything that everybody said to them, including their doctors, So I think that was the first thing. Anyway, let's move on then. This is Watson again. Now, this interview, this is just the last bit, I think, of an interview from either a year or two before Watson died in his 90s. And I think he was asked about his legacy. It's not every day a movement is born which is, in its general application, could revolutionize mankind or humanity. Obviously, products of their time, so they talked about mankind all the time. You'll see it in virtually all the quotes that are coming up. But then it was in Eva Batty's one as well from the 60s. So, language evolves, as we know. This one is more difficult to see. Maybe I could put this on full screen for a second. If I get rid of that branding, get rid of that banner, you can see everything, I think. Okay, so this is 2002. This is Donald Watson talking about his vision of veganism as a movement, and he was talking about the kind of bigness of it. And I've always speculated that this could be seen as a bit arrogant in a sense, because he was talking about veganism as an overarching kind of philosophical thing which encompasses everything else. And what's Cross talked about that in terms of the vegan principle. And he then talked about things like lesser movements, and basically kind of meant kind of almost like single issue type movements. And so I think that would possibly upset a few people. But he's basically saying that all lesser movements for doing good work in themselves in a limited sphere are only, to use a common cliche, like the people rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Instead of helping us, the vegans, to guide the searchlight on the iceberg, which is going to be the end of the whole show. And so this is kind of like the size of what they saw as the vegan project. It basically was, because elsewhere Watson said that ours is the only movement that can save humanity, and they kind of meant that. I don't think it was just bravado or anything, and I don't think it was arrogance, but it certainly was a kind of big claim.
Of course, it's kind of in some ways that's never been true, because if you look at what's the kind of biggest threat to humanity at the moment? I mean, I think there's several threats. I mean, nuclear weapons are a huge threat, aren't they? Probably more so now than they have been for many years. But the climate crisis, is a huge threat to, certainly to life as we know it. And a major cause of that, in fact, I think it kind of has pretty much been shown to be the major cause of the climate crisis is animal agriculture. And so, if we want to, effectively combat the climate crisis, we have to end animal agriculture, and indeed we have to end the fishing industry as well. The fishing industry causes a greater contribution to the climate crisis than all flying, than all aircraft. In terms, because of the damage it causes to to vegetation in the ocean and stuff like that. And so that statement perhaps has never been truer than it is today.
Yeah, it's funny because I tuned into the Animal Rising kind of Zoom thing yesterday, and one of the points they made was that our oceans would be empty of life in a few years, and the only thing that I kind of thought was our oceans. I think we should maybe question that idea a little bit, but I kind of know what they mean by that. It's just that, again, I always used to react against the hunt saboteurs when they used to say things like "hands off our wildlife," and I was thinking, well, the wildlife belongs to themselves. The free living beings, they're not our property or anything. And so I never liked that kind of slogan, and kind of never do really. So let's move on to Leslie Cross then. Excuse me. Now, people who've seen my kind of pioneer presentations before won't have seen this. This is from 1948. It's interesting, this. It's Man and Nature from the Vegan. So the following is an extract from the second part of a talk entitled Animal Emancipation Related to Human Progress, given recently to a group of Society of Friends, so the Quakers. And it's interesting that because that is a borrow, I think, from Henry Salt and his book Animal Rights in Relation to Human Progress. So I don't know whether it was deliberate. Presumably it kind of was. And so there's some interesting parts that I wanted to pick out about this. This one is talking about violence and human violence and human violence towards each other and also other animals and the kind of links between them. And it emphasizes for me the fact that the vegan movement was kind of seen as almost like the ultimate peace movement. I mean, we've got to remember that the Vegan Society was founded during the Second World War, so-called. There is that. And in terms of recruitment, Donald Watson said that he wanted people to join the vegans as part of their peace aims, as he put it. And so, if you're part of another movement, these lesser movements, then join the vegans, kind of alliance politics and all that. And then the idea would be to that would increase the idea of kind of general peace. So if violence between men is undesirable, how much less desirable is violence done by men to utterly helpless creatures? And they're always talking about the kind of rebound effect. And there is something to be said about that, Ronnie, in the sense that some critics of some of the animals only kind of people will say that the concern about humans is only a secondary thing. It's a kind of like, well, it just so happens that humans will benefit as well. But I think actually their writing makes it clear that it's not that it was always both, the benefit to both was always integral. In other words, I think that it's pretty clear that is true. So moving on, unless you want to say something about that one, Ronnie?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So I'm going to go down to the third line here. Animals share with us the habitation of this globe, and they are as entitled as we are to the benefits of a natural and developmental evolution. Cross wrote fairly kind of flowery, as I've said before, but also he talked about evolution a lot. In particular, he talked about the moral evolution of humanity, and he thought that was a major principle of veganism. We might learn much from them, and who might, with love, aid them in their evolution. Now, this is where the language gets really interesting. Offer them not love, not even tolerance, but a philosophy which is exemplified by the steel of the slaughterer knife and the bit in a horse's mouth. We cannot conduct against them a war of aggression, even less principled than the wars between men. Truly, he who says he loves peace cannot love peace wholly if he turns upon his fellow creatures in an act of slaughter. So I think that basically what he's saying there, when he says this foul language about the steel of a slaughterer's knife and the bit in a horse's mouth, I think he's basically saying we're not offering them love or even tolerance, but we're offering them a very strong philosophy of liberation. I think that's what he's saying there. So I think that's quite a fine kind of little piece. But as I said, it's not soundbite stuff, but it never is with Cross. Now this is interesting because the language here is very reminiscent of the recent language from Animal Rising. In the sphere of positive evidence, there are those rare but revealing glimpses of the way in which man's evolution is aided as a result of a reformed relationship with nature. Man has somehow slipped in this relationship with undesirable consequences to both nature and himself. He is out of tune with nature. He bears a relationship with her which might be likened to a geographical fault. If he could return to his rightful place, if he could approach her as a friend and a lover instead of a dissecting botanist and a murderous overlord, the resulting harmony would constitute a tremendous and incalculable evolutionary gain. As I said, flowery as anything. And you had something to say about this one, Ronnie. I think.
Yes, this bit where he says man has somehow slipped in this relationship.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to where Animal Rising are talking about a broken relationship. Well, a broken relationship implies that at one time that relationship was okay and then it became broken. And I would argue that it's never been okay. I'd argue that humans have always really been oppressors of other animals. And it's just that oppression has become worse for various reasons, and technology is a big, is a kind of big reason for that.
A big driving force, yeah.
Big driving force. The increase in human population means more humans, and therefore more oppressors of other animals, etc., etc. But I can't see that it's ever been okay, to be honest. And so you can't. Talking about something being broken implies that at one time it was unbroken, that at one time it was whole, and I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
I'm the same. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to go there. What I would suggest in relation to the vegans of the 1940s and also of Animal Rising now is the vegans of the 1940s have just experienced, some of them actually physically experienced, 2 global conflicts. And so they talked about a barbarity, a savagery of humans. Now, historians would argue with them and say, well, actually, we're not as barbaric as we used to be, right? Whereas they thought that I don't know whether they're thinking about peaks and troughs, but they thought that we'd kind of gone down a level or 2 in terms of moral evolution, and that veganism was needed to get us kind of back out. That's what they were essentially kind of arguing.
See, I'm not sure about that. I think what's happened is, once again, its technology has enabled humans to become more effective killers, both of humans.
Of course. I mean, but the point is, Ronnie, I mean, they were just learning about things like the concentration camps and the Holocaust, and like, I mean, for us, it's history and it's Hollywood films. For them, it was coming in on their newspapers and their radios. And so I think we've got to try to kind of almost like see the shock of that. Then they were obviously experiencing carpet bombing and stuff. And Watson himself was very upset about what happened to Dresden, for example, and stuff. And so I think that it is interesting, the fact that they just did see, I think, because of their time, they saw that humanity had kind of hit a new kind of low. And I think that we would kind of argue now, in the kind of scheme of things, it probably wasn't, but that's how they saw it. And going to Animal Rising, we've now got the new low of the fact that the planet is actually under threat, which wasn't even known about in the 1940s, presumably. Although ironically, they did start talking about a few things.
I think there, there were some scientists that kind of, even in those days, were giving warnings about the fate of the planet. I don't think there was so much knowledge in those days regarding global heating. But I have seen some articles from really quite a long time ago that kind of did talk about it.
Yeah.
Obviously much less so than today, but I think it kind of was, for some scientists, it has been a worry for many decades.
Well, was there ever a phrase, because obviously we've got climate change now, then it was global warming before that. Was there a phrase before that you're referring to then, or something like that?
I'm not really sure what kind of phrase was used to describe it, but it certainly did. It kind of did refer to the climate changing and in general, temperatures rising and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with this. A lot of tech is clever but not wise, and I think that's kind of really the problem with humanity in a way. And Ronnie, Freud said that we are a ferocious creature, and kind of always have been. And I suppose you'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Well, I think I think we are and we're not. Depends what
not trying to label you as a Freudian. I'm just saying that you might agree with that statement.
I think that's within it. It's certainly within humans to be ferocious, to be horrendously ferocious. That is within humans. But there's also a lot of good stuff within humans. It depends which aspect of humans is encouraged and nurtured, I think. And I think the problem is that we have governments all over the world that people look to for leadership, that actually encourage greed and acquisition and and violence and wars and the manufacture of weapons and stuff like that. The example given by governments worldwide to their populations is a violent one. Rather than
how old were you in 58, Ronnie?
I was 7.
Yeah, well,
I was 7. Yeah.
Exposure.
Yeah,
is that a
and,
film?
and I think it was mentioned, like, even before that. I remember seeing a post of an article that I think was way before 58 where it was mentioned as well.
Right. Okay. So I'm just gonna sling this up that I've used quite often. This is 2004, Matthew Cole, sociologist, and he talks about the vegan aim combines compassionate non-exploitation of other animals with an emancipated vegan self and a more compassionate human society. Vegan ethics from the beginning was directed towards these interconnected goals of transforming human beings and transforming human society, with both flowing from the foundational reconfiguration of human, non-human, animal relations. So that is him looking back. And again, you see the chapter there. You might not be able to see it because the writing is very small. The greatest cause on earth, which is a quote from Watson, the historical formation of veganism as an ethical practice. And it's in this book called The Rise of Critical Animal Studies, 2014. So I always think that's a pretty good summary. Again, we've got a few interesting summaries in the movement. This is the last one that I'm actually using, but I always like Matthew's one here because he's kind of looking at the the foundational values of the movement essentially. Now this is Donald Watson. Don't want to say much about this in a sense. Let me think. What number 10? Yeah, he was talking about a new relationship, and I'm just going to read from below halfway. Therefore, in man's interest, animal exploitation must end. Not only flesh food, but all products of the slaughterhouse must be denounced, and the most serious effort made to avoid their use. Human existence does not depend upon the inconceivable tyranny now existing against animals. In fact, progress is impeded enormously by it. And again, that kind of language, again, I mean, tyranny, that's like more in the oppression side of things than the exploitation side of things, in terms of what you were saying before, Ronnie, maybe.
Yes, I mean, I think it covers both, and I think yes, I think it's a good word, tyranny. I think this is that that the human species occupies the earth as tyrant, and I use the word occupy quite pointedly, because I think there is a difference between an occupation and an inhabitation, and our species doesn't inhabit the earth. If we inhabited the earth, we'd be living in harmony with other animals and not oppressing or exploiting them. But we occupy the earth. In other words, we're the human species is a force of occupation. It's imperialism. We're an imperialist. We're in an imperialistic force on the earth, and it does amount to tyranny.
You've called it the human Reich.
The human Reich. Well, Reich means empire. Reich is the German word for empire. You see, so and it is a Reich. It's an imperialist occupation of the earth. Our attitude to other animals is an imperialistic one, and in that sense, the struggle for animal liberation is the most fundamental of all struggles against imperialism.
Yeah, I remember we must have done some AL's own thing with Steve Best, and I remember you using that phrase, and he really liked it. I remember that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okie dokie. So this one here is, as well as not being just animals only, Leslie Cross made it very clear that it was about liberation. But again, he had that caveat about for the creatures and the mind and heart of man. And so that one actually feeds into one thing that he thought was true, which was that we would benefit psychologically as well as physically from being peaceful and non-violent. And I've always thought that the implication of vegan philosophy is that it was bound to be that a vegan world would be much less violent in terms of human relations. I don't see, I mean, I know Gary Francione has argued, for example, that you can be a vegan and sexist and a vegan and racist. I don't see how that can be, personally, because I think it's a justice for all.
Well, see, veganism is an anti-speciesist philosophy, and it's not consistent to be anti-speciesist and to be racist and to be sexist, is it? Those things, because how can we make an argument against speciesism?
Well, some people would say it was separate, though, Ronnie.
Yeah, but you can't. But they're linked, aren't they? Because because speciesism is a prejudice against another living being because that other living being is different. That's kind of what it's based on, and so is racism, so is sexism, so is homophobia, etc. And so it's inconsistent to be you can't make an argument against speciesism if you're racist, because it's it kind of doesn't fit together. You can't, because the argument against speciesism is in a sense based on arguments against racism, arguments against sexism.
So what would you say, Ronnie, to those vegans who say that we can work with sexist and racist people if they care about other animals like we do?
Well, I think there's various problems with that. I think one big problem is that we want as many people as possible to be involved in the vegan movement. We want as many people as possible to be involved in promoting veganism. And so if we do work with people who are racist and sexist, then that's going to prevent loads of other people joining the movements. Are people of other races and ethnicities going to join the movement that's kind of contains racists? Are women going to want to be involved in the movement that contains sexists? They're kind of not, are they? So just in terms of like kind of our ability to promote veganism, it's really harmful to be involved with people who are sexist and racist.
That's a kind of alliance politics point, isn't it? Here's David reversing it on you. Can there be feminists and anti-racists who are speciesists?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, of course they can.
But the point is that often what's said is that we can't say anything to them about that. And of course we can. I mean, we can challenge everybody who is non-vegan because of their speciesism.
Yeah, and kind of if someone is anti-racist, you can use that as in talking to them about anti-speciesism, because you can show them how it all amounts to the same thing. It's prejudiced against another being because the other being is different. They don't want prejudice against other humans because of the color of their skin, for instance, or their ethnicity. And that's very similar to prejudice against other beings because they have fur or they have scales or whatever. It's very close. So with those people, it's in fact probably easier to get them to see the connection.
Yeah, well, you mentioned connection. You've used the word links, and of course, we've got concepts which kind of describe that. So I'm not going to use that controversial word that starts with inter and ends with sectional. What I'm going to do is talk about things like academics, especially kind of eco-feminists, have talked about the logic of domination. And of course, we've got David Nibbert, who talks about the entanglements of oppression and liberation. And it's kind of like you don't get oppression in isolation, and we're not going to get liberation in isolation. And so those values are very much central to what the pioneers work for. And this is 47. This is Watson again, that in talking about vegan values, if vegan principles came into being, it would represent the greatest peaceful revolution ever known. And again, once more, who is the beneficiaries? It's going to be humans and other animals. So it's the same kind of thing over and over again. So I don't really know when I get told that they've looked at what the pioneers of our movement said, and they say that they themselves were animals only. I don't know what they're reading, because they're not reading the same material that I'm reading anyway. Because it's clear right from the outset that wasn't the case.
I think people are probably reading what they want to read, but I think the question is kind of why do those people want to be animals only? Because you can focus on campaigning against human oppression of other animals, while at the same time be opposed to human oppression of other humans. The two things aren't contradictory, are they? So I wonder why they kind of insist so much on it being animals only. I kind of don't really understand that.
Well, you know the argument that the animals deserve their own movement and that we shouldn't
But
dilute
the animals
our
have got
movement with human issues.
but the animals have got their own movement, and it's the animal liberation movement. You know, we're talking here about veganism.
Well,
You know.
that's the animals movement as well.
Yeah, but you see that. But I think with veganism, you know, veganism is obviously concerned with all sentient life, which would be other animals and humans.
Yeah, well, I'm
Um,
glad you brought that language point up because race leaders said, I want it to be animals only since humans are animals. But the animals only people, when they say animals only, they mean other animals only.
yeah, they mean other animals. You see, the thing is, you see, the animal liberation movement is a movement to liberate other animals from oppression by humans, in the same way as, you know, the women's liberation movement is a movement to liberate women from oppression by men. You know, it is. You know, I think the animal liberation movement is is uh, is just about other animals, but veganism is different to that, in that veganism is about all sentient life, and so people that that argue that animals haven't got their own movement, that isn't true. They have. It's the animal liberation movement.
Or the animal rights movement, you might even
Well,
say.
or the animal rights movement, absolutely, yes. You know,
Well,
so it makes no sense.
yeah, there's
To
some
say,
interesting contributions here from David. Two from David. Wasn't referring to human moral progress, but human relations are not the focus of veganism. In fact, we're going to come on to that right now. Why does veganism have to fix all the problems of the world? And then he adds to that by saying, why are vegans held to higher standards than all other activists for other issues? Well, that's answered by what Watson said, that they are lesser movements, right? And so this is where you've got to be a bit careful because it sounds a bit arrogant, but he's basically saying that veganism is an overarching, almost like an umbrella term based on justice and peace and nonviolence, which incorporates everything else, right? And so this is why we can't have a racist vegan, because they're kind of not fitting themselves under the umbrella of even veganism if they are racist. And so I think that's what it is. And you know,
yeah,
you said
you can have a racist plant-based person, and I think this is another kind of confusion that that exists, or where people kind of aren't following what the or aren't aware of what the founders of veganism intended. And I think there are a lot of people call themselves vegan that think it's really just about diet and about not consuming animal products, and so of course you can have a person who's racist that doesn't consume animal products, or a person who's sexist that doesn't.
It's about being an animal lover, isn't it, Ronnie?
Well, I mean that's a I mean, that's another issue as well, isn't it? But you see, so if people are equating, if people are equating veganism very much just being a diet, then yeah, it's possible to kind of be racist, sexist. It's possible to be a Nazi and to not consume animal products for whatever reason. But veganism is far more than just avoiding animal products.
Indeed, it is. And so you mentioned, well, and also David did this kind of thing about focus. And so the next two slides, and I'm not going to read them, but just kind of dash through them really, both from Cross. And this is where he develops his idea about focus and scope. And the first one is talking about the changes that are obvious from a vegan point of view. And he says things like there'll be no butchers, and milk will be delivered, but it'll be vegan milk and this kind of stuff. No vivisectional rewards. The kind of things that we would see as the obvious, the focus type stuff. And then he said, but some of the changes are not so obvious. The benefits to man himself. And then that is also said in this document, which is actually 3 years earlier. And he talks here about the two broad aspects of veganism, and so focus and scope. So the first broad aspect is, again, the things that we'd expect. So we talk about food, commodities, work, hunting, vivisection. Other animals will not be used for that purpose. The second broad aspect of veganism is the effect on human evolution. So this is where he gets the moral evolution of humanity. Apart from the abolition of enormous burden of cruelty, which is bound constantly to return like a boomerang upon humanity's own head, just be remembered that any relationship of master and slave, the greatest and deepest harm is suffering not by the slave, but by the master. Now, a lot of people react badly to that. And the reason he says that is he thinks that it's like a psychological damage, that by being an exploiter, you're damaged. So obviously, it's kind of taken as read that the exploited are damaged, but he's saying that the exploiter is damaged even more. Now, I don't necessarily know if I'd kind of go along with that in terms of putting it in that kind of order, but I can see what he would mean by both are damaged, but I'm not quite sure that I would like to put the exploiter's situation ahead of the exploited.
No, I wouldn't either. I mean, once again, we kind of see this happening in a kind of like on a species level, really, with the climate crisis. That's something that's come. Our oppression of other animals has come to kick us up the arse, hasn't it? Because we've so we've so damaged the natural world, where those other animals live, and damaged them in the process. We've done that to such an extent. It's coming back now to harm humans. And so that really is an example of what was said there.
Yeah, David said. So any other movements are held to a different standard. Well, that's what Watson was getting at. And so again, because I think you go on and say, like a feminist can be ableist and ageist, etc. Well, the difference then, I think, is the fact that we're talking about single issues versus a general principle. And all the vegan pioneers said that veganism was a general principle that could be applied to areas of injustice. And so this is why I tend to use a shorthand that it's a justice for all movement. And another kind of issue, which is more difficult because it makes, admittedly, it kind of makes the job of vegans harder, is the fact that if there is an issue of injustice, it's a vegan issue, because veganism is the opposition to injustice. And so, I tend to think of it in those big terms. Whether that is making our, I'm not quite sure what I want to say here, making our job too hard, or almost being, again, the hesitation I have at this thing with Watson's thing is it sounds a bit arrogant. Or we're better, our movement is better than your movement. My dad's bigger than your dad. But that's the bit that I worry about in relation to that. But what they were getting at is that veganism is not just another movement to line up against the others. They thought veganism was more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, it is true that somebody could be a feminist and be racist, but it would be it would they could say, yeah, I want rights for women, but what about the women? It would be like, I want white women to not be oppressed by men, but I don't care about black women. Now, do such people exist? I'm not sure.
That was the foundation principle of black feminism, actually, Ronnie. The fact that you had, certainly when you talked about first wave feminists, like the suffragettes and suffragists, they often had black maids
Yes, I can understand that, because some of them were really quite wealthy, weren't they?
Yeah, because it was a
Yes,
middle class kind of
so
thing.
that's right. But it's still not consistent, is it? It's not consistent. That's the thing. And so yes, I suppose someone could say, well, I'm opposed to humans exploiting non-human animals, oppressing non-human animals, but I'm not concerned about humans oppressing other humans. That could be how someone feels, but it's kind of not. It's not consistent. It's not a consistent position, is it?
No, we've been asked this about 2 or 3 times now. Working definition of racist and racism. Joanna has put this up as a definition of racism, and this is interesting in the sense that, just like speciesism, sociologists tend to think of these isms as a bit more structural than this. So it's not necessarily something that's held in the individuals. The behavior and their attitudes are kind of articulated by individuals, but it's more than that. So it's kind of institutionalized in the same way as, do you remember when a few years ago there was an investigation of Scotland Yard, and it was said that the London police were institutionally racist. Remember that, Ronnie?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just a question of that there are individuals who are racist. It's more that, again, you've got an overarching structure which supports racism. So this is why you get the more contentious ideas that every white person by default is racist, because they are supportive of a system which is just by dint of being white. And so that's why we're asked as allies not to not be racist, but to fight racism. I think that makes a bit of sense. What would your working definition be?
Well, I think well, I'd say it's prejudice against and oppression of other humans because they're of a different color or of a different ethnic background. Really, it's to do with oppressing those who are different in some way to the oppressor, and this is why it's very closely linked with speciesism and sexism and homophobia, where it's all to do with that other being is different to me, so because of that I'm entitled to oppress and exploit that other being.
Yeah. I can see David's point here, and I did say that I'm kind of a bit hesitant with this area, which does come from Watson. We are if we present veganism as a panacea to all issues, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and animals will be affected by it. The moral superiority non-vegans talk about acquires more validity. Now, I think that's to do with presentation and the way we put it over. I don't think that we ought to come over as holier than thou, which is obviously what we're accused of. I think it's more to do with explaining what vegan philosophy is, and just say and we obviously try to adhere to that, and that every moral agent in the world could do that, even the ones who have difficulty adjusting their dietary situation to the philosophy. But if you're a moral agent who can understand philosophical ideas like justice and injustice and all the rest of it, peace, then you can understand veganism. So I think this is kind of a presentational project, because I think if people want to attack somebody else who's got a moral position, whatever it is, they'll make that point about, oh, you're just morally superior. It's a little bit like I always think about like phrases like meat is murder. You know, that kind of rhetorical label that we have, or a badge. You know, meat is murder. And of course, what the non-vegans then do is say, "Oh, you're calling me a murderer, then, are you?" Right? And so it becomes like a word game, in order to say, "Oh, you know, you think you're better than me," and all this kind of stuff, and all that, which is what Nathan, what's he, Ramesh? I can never get his name.
The comedian, yeah.
Because he said, "Oh, people think that vegans are superior." Well, there's a reason for that. We are. Right?
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
But you see, another point is that even just in terms of what we need to do to achieve animal liberation, then the changes that have to come about because of that would, to a large extent, sort of bring about kind of human liberation as well. In other words, like, just for instance, like, we need to end animal agriculture and we need to end the fishing industry as part of, you know, as a huge aspect of obtaining animal liberation. Well, ending those things makes a better planet for humans, because it, you know, that would effectively combat the climate crisis, and so then humans would be, you know, better off in that sense. And you know, the restoration of the natural world would be better for humans would give humans a better world to live in. And then there are other things, like in terms of the economic system. You know, that would be you know, that would have to be changed tremendously in order to bring about animal liberation. And the reason for that is because, you know, we would have to have degrowth. We'd have to stop all this kind of, you know, making economic growth some sort of god, because what economic growth means is that it means more things are being produced and consumed, which means that where does that all come from? That you know, that all comes from natural world, through mining, through extraction, and then there's transportation of those things, and that further contributes to the climate crisis and to pollution and stuff like that harms other animals, you see. And so so we have to have a completely different economic system, and if we are going to have degrowth, you have to have redistribution of wealth, because if there's less stuff to go round, then it means the poor will get even poorer, and it won't really affect the rich because they got loads of stuff anyway. You see, so that redistribution of wealth, which, you know, would inevitably have to happen if we were going to have an economic system that didn't harm other animals. Or
you're bringing us on to what we were hoping to move on to, but
that's right. So that's the you know, that different that economy benefits humans, because it means, you know, people would no longer be poor because you're redistributing wealth, you know, because you kind of have to because of that system you're bringing in, because you want to reduce harmful impact on other animals, you see. So there's, you know, the two things are very close together.
Okay, well, before we go on to that, we'll have to decide whether we're going to explore it in full or just do an advert for something. Like, we might do it next week, I don't know. But David says non-vegans already think that just because we reject animal exploitation, we believe we're holier than thou. It's not going to help if we say that we're activists against all forms of oppression. Well, first of all, I'm against all forms of oppression, so that's not a problem. But also, I mean, you're going to get the accusation of holier than thou no matter what you do, to that extent.
But you see, I'm just wondering how that comes into that. If I'm having a discussion with someone and explaining to them why it's wrong to exploit other animals.
Yeah, it's the reason. That's right. You're quite right.
Then it kind of, whether I come across as holier than thou, depends on how I say it, doesn't it? You know, depends on, the tone of that conversation.
But also it's to do with the size of the idea. I mean, if we say, oh, we reject animal exploitation because it's cruel, that's one thing. If we say we reject the exploitation of other animals because we believe in justice, which I think is a more vegan thing to say, then we are against all forms of repression because it's unjust.
You kind of have to be, because you see, just to give you an example, like and this came up with Aintree and with the horses, and the racehorses, in fact, loads of racehorses that are bred are killed before they even get to race because they're not suitable, and that probably is the worst aspect of all about horse racing, rather than the ones that are killed on the courses. And there's been a lot of emphasis on the number of deaths at Aintree and how bad jump racing is, when in fact it's the racing industry as a whole, including flat racing, which causes huge slaughter of the horses, both before and after their racing careers, so to speak. But anyway, but just to say that, you see, there was someone from the racing industry that was arguing, yes, okay, I accept that these horses are killed, and they're killed at like only a fraction of what would be their natural lifespan, but by bringing them into existence, we're giving them a life, and they're treated really well. They're looked after really, really well because they're valuable commodities. And so therefore that justifies it, because although we kill them early, they're at least given a life, right? Well, the argument about that is to say, yeah, but look, what if we did that with humans? What if we bred a load of children, and when they were 3 years old, we killed them all so we could breed another load of children? That would be okay, wouldn't it? Because at least we're giving all those children a life. And so therefore you combat the argument about other animals by explaining why it would be wrong to do it to humans, and they'll understand that, because they'll understand it would be wrong to do it to other humans. So it's someone's understanding that something is wrong in relation to other humans that can be used to get them to understand why it would be wrong in relation to non-human animals. So that's why, like, human rights is kind of really fundamental to animal rights, because you kind of can't, in a sense, argue for animal rights unless people accept human rights.
Yes. I mean, the interesting thing about one example there would be, because it will be that I think it's about 12,000 up to 20,000 children will die of starvation-related issues today, right? And so would we go, okay, well, look, we need vivisection on the right species, so let's get a few of those, give them a nice life for 3 or 4 months, and then use them in vivisection laboratories, because then at least we're researching on the right species, and we've kind of improved their life as well, because we've stopped them from starving. I mean, obviously people would be appalled by that idea, yes, even though it would be a net benefit in a weird way.
Of course, the response that some people would make is yes, but like, that's different, because that's humans, and what you're talking about is animals. And then you get into a discussion of like why it's wrong to consider humans more important than other sentient animals. Then you get into that discussion, and then you go down that road. But then that argument is kind of I think it's kind of easy to make that argument that humans aren't more important than other sentient animals. I think that's that. To me, that's it's kind of quite easy to make that argument.
Well, to underline what you said about human rights and animal rights, you've got this from Reagan, where he argues that the animal rights movement is a part of and not opposed to the human rights movement. He saw animal rights as an extension of human rights thinking, and so this was him arguing about, to be for animals is not to be against humanity, to require others to treat animals' justice as their rights require is not to ask for anything more or less than in the case of any human to whom just treatment is due. The animal rights movement is a part of, not opposed to, the human rights movement. Attempts to dismiss it as anti-human are mere rhetoric. And so again, I think it's the fact that those interconnections have always been there in terms of our thinking. And so the idea of an animal movement that is not concerned about humans. I mean, just on the practicalities of it, when people say to me, the vegan movement is the animals movement. Well, that's not true, actually, in the sense that it's populated by human beings. The other animals are the subject of the vegan, animal liberation, animal rights movement, but they don't make it up. They don't populate those movements. Social movements are populated by human beings. And if we hate humans, then we're kind of saying, well, there's no chance then. I mean, if we think that humans are just vile, if we take a kind of Gary Oski thing that he hates humanity, including himself, where does that go? And why did he bother talking to all those students if he hates them all?
Yeah, I think you can kind of hate the way that the human species has behaved in general.
Oh yeah, well that's the sinner, not the sinner thing, isn't it?
That's yeah. But the human species is made up of humans, of course. So it's down to kind of what all those individuals have done collectively has kind of caused what's kind of happened. But that doesn't mean that every single human is like a piece of shit, does it? There are lots and lots of very, very decent human beings and lots of human beings that that are campaigning for.
They're all arseholes, Ronnie. They're all
oppression. Well, I think, I mean, I think there are a lot of people. I do regard a lot of people as arseholes, but I don't regard everyone as arseholes. That's the point, and so I don't have a general hatred of humanity because within humanity there are a considerable number of really decent people.
But if there aren't, then what's the point of campaigning?
Well, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, if humanity is a lost cause, if you really think that, I mean that's what creates animal welfareism. A lot of people go, we'll never have a vegan world. Humans are horrible. The only thing we can do is improve things.
Yeah. I think it's a defeatist attitude that you've already surrendered. Welfareism is like a kind of surrender, isn't it? When that's said.
But I get it. It's easy to be pessimistic about humanity. I mean, just look around, right? But I mean, what's the point? I mean, like,
I think a lot of it. I think the problem is that humans in general tend to be easily influenced and easily led, and it depends on who the influencers are. So we as vegans have to get into a position where we can become.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, if people can be, if the socialization was vegan.
Yes. Yeah. And the problem is that, as I said earlier, we've got governments all over the world that are instilling into people a kind of really, really harmful way of being and harmful way of thinking. And they're kind of encouraging, the kind of negative side of humans in a sense, aren't they? The competitive, greedy, acquisitive, materialistic side of humans, because it helps it helps big business for people to be like that. They want people to consume, don't they? And to be greedy, because that means they can sell more things and they become richer. And so this is encouraged worldwide by governments. And while we've got governments that are like that, then you can't expect the average human to kind of not be affected by that and not to kind of be moved in that direction.
Well, just join in, isn't it? It's
Yeah, so we have to
in.
get into a position where we're the ones that call the shots, where we're the ones that are the kind of, that run the show, so that then people will become influenced by us and kind of will then, take their values from us. And it's a question of like how we do that. What strategy do we adopt? What tactics do we adopt in order to get into that position?
Yeah, we have a decision to make, Mr. Lee. This is our last. It wasn't going to be the last one, but I jumped one.
Yeah.
So we were going to talk about this because one aspect of this making it up as you go along is the problem that's arisen in. I mean, I think it's always been there, maybe, but in terms of it's being a problem, significant problem within the movement. This is, for me, I would say it's the last 10 years, maybe less. I don't know. But, the idea of calling our movement either left-wing or left-leaning wouldn't have really caused much of a ruckus, really. But it does now. But the point is, we've been going for an hour and a half, Ronnie. Do we want to, as it were, hand this over to next week, or do we want to do it now?
I think if we can do it quite briefly now, it would be good.
Okay.
It follows on from from what we've been saying, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, the first thing I wanted to say when we move to this one is that I think we need to challenge ourselves, because what people will say to us, me and you, is that we're out of date about this, that the first of all, some people would say left and right don't mean anything anymore, but other people would say that what is regarded as right is kind of different from what we might have thought about it, and certainly that the left has become a weird, bit of a strange place now. That would be seriously kind of suggested to us. So I think we ought to bear that critique in mind, and we can do that by just looking at, do we agree with what this is? Steve Best from 2013. This is his famous or infamous Total Liberation talk, and he says this movement is a left-wing movement. But before he said that, he said something really important. So I should have kept it in. He said, "Look, I don't care what your politics is, but this movement is a left-wing movement." And I think what he meant there was that you might not see yourself as left-wing, but if you look at vegan values, they are left-wing, and so therefore your task then is to say, well, how do my values and vegan values align? And to it's a kind of challenge to people without left values. If we accept that there's two lists that Best offers us is valid. So left-wing values, he says, equality, democracy, inclusivity, non-discrimination, non-hierarchy, rights, justice, peace, non-violence. Now we can easily see that these are vegan values. We've had that, for the last hour and a half being said to us by the pioneers. But then he says right-wing values are hierarchy, military, family, by which he means a patriarchal kind of family, nation, borders, think Trump and his walls and all that, war and security. They said that's not what we talk about. We talk about the opposite. And he says our heritage, whether we realize it or not, is from the left. Now, we're going to agree with that, Ronnie, right? But is it still valid, do you think?
Well, I think it's still valid that that the animal liberation movement and indeed the vegan movement are of the left. Yes, I mean, I would totally agree with and accept that. I think there are two strands though of left and right, and one's the economic strand and the other's the social strand. You see, and so so you kind of have to look at each one. I've already talked about the economically. I think that a movement that seeks to liberate other animals from oppression by humans, and indeed to liberate humans from oppression and exploitation by other humans, economically has to be of the left. I mean, you know, if you're talking about exploitation of humans, then straight away we're looking at capitalism, aren't we? You know, that's the exploitation of humans by other humans. So if we're going to end exploitation of humans by humans, we have to end capitalism, and we have to replace that by a different economic system, which I would argue would need to be something like eco-socialism, or green anarchism. It has to be something where humans are no longer exploited for their labor, because that is exploitation, and so that would be against vegan values. And also, you know, what I said earlier about, you know, about the fact that we need degrowth and we need to end consumption and stuff like that. Once again, the economic system that we would need there would have to be of the left. And that doesn't mean that all economic systems in the past that have claimed to be of the left have been beneficial to either humans or animals. If we look at Soviet Russia, for instance, that kind of, you know, claimed to be of the left, there are a lot of people, you know, said that wasn't really communism, but it was actually state capitalism. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that all those systems claimed to be of the left were actually beneficial. But the system that we do need to have, if we're going to have a better world for both humans and other animals, economically has to be of the left. And so that's the economic one. And then when it comes on to the, you know, when we're talking about the social, really what Steve Best was a lot of that he was talking there was really about social values rather than economic values. And I think, yeah, I mean, certainly as I've said already, that it's kind of, it's inconsistent to, you know, to be racist and to be sexist, homophobic. Those things are like inconsistent with anti-speciesism, and, you know, inconsistent with veganism. You see, so there's that argument as well, like kind of when we're talking about the social spectrum of left and right.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We there is quite a lot of pushback about this now, and again, my first instinct is to do the Corey Wren thing and talk about the fact that the vegan movement has taken off, and there has been an increase in the number of right-wing people in the movement, and so that has caused a lot of trouble in terms of their view of you know, these ideas of logic of domination, and of course, you know, the spectre of intersectionality has become weaponized, and also I think that well, I think in terms of academia and also its use within social movements, things have not kind of gone well for intersectionality, and I think a lot of people have pulled away from it, because I think the promise that it seemed to have, it's more like cause more trouble than it's worth in a way, because Crenshaw, who came up with the idea of intersectionality, which really was just a different word for ideas that already existed, like logic of domination and stuff. You know, she, as an academic, because some Black activists, for example, have said that when other people try to apply it, they're kind of betraying the values of intersectionality. Whereas Crenshaw herself said that, well, I'm an academic. This is a concept. It's bound to be applied, and there's nothing wrong with that. She didn't seem to have any problem with that, the actual person who came up with the word. But in terms of the way it's kind of panned out, either in academia or within the social movement sphere, it seems to be a kind of problem. It's just that it's not the only word to express the same ideas, you know. So we've got Niebuhr again, you know, entanglements. You've got logic of domination, you know, these kind of ideas. But the people on the right just don't like it because it associates them with ideas that they don't want to go, which is where the impulse for the animals only thing seems to arise. Because if they can reduce veganism to that, you know, and I do think it's a reducitarian impulse, it means that they can then start saying, well, you don't have to inquire about, you know, the values of the humans involved. You just have to get on with them because everybody is an animal person, right? And the problem with that is what you said about half an hour ago, which is if you expect feminists to walk with men's rights activists, etc., then you're essentially asking some people who are marginalized to effectively march alongside their oppressors, and they're not going to do that. And so you're automatically starting to filter out the left with that idea that everybody can, you know, and you know, it's got nothing to do with you know, human issues, you know. And so I think it's deeply problematic, you know. And it's, but as I said, it wasn't a problem until, I mean, when did you first? I mean, I'd say 7-8 years ago, you know, because if you were to talk about the movement being left leaning and left wing, and another thing that's worth saying, I suppose, is that when Best talks about left wing, he does draw left wing very widely. He says from, you know, the communists and the anarchists that you've talked about, right up to what he calls left-leaning liberals. So that's a huge population of people, you know, which he would still incorporate as left. Yeah. So, well, that's my take on this kind of thing. Matthew Scully. Yeah. Well, interesting, because Scully gets mentioned by Best in this talk. So it's worth watching this. It's on YouTube. If you just put in Steve Best Talk Liberation, you'll get it. It's a very powerful talk, and he does talk about Matthew Scully because he was the speechwriter for who was it now? Help me out, Benny. Who was he speechwriter for? You know, the Canadian, you know, the Canadian right wing. Was it Canadian right wing person or somebody who lived near Canada? What am I thinking of? Sarah Palin. So yeah, so it's really just kind of basically kind of saying, look, if these are left values, and we can see that they're also vegan values, then if the right-wing values listed here are the ones that we oppose, then that creates a problem. And then on top of that, you've got that thing, your economic side of it, Ronnie, which you tend to lead on.
Yeah, because I think in terms of harm to other animals,
yeah,
that's
because it's
more
based
serious.
on kind of structural inequality.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and that can't be right in terms of anything.
No, it's not. It's not right. I mean, it's like, you know, why have we, you know, why have we got a system where some people are filthy rich and other people are starving? That can't be right. That you know, that's morally wrong. You know, and politics has to be based on morality.
Well, the right-wing take on that is that the rich are there because they deserve it. It's a meritocracy, and the poor.
But deserve it how? Deserve it mostly through actions they've taken to earn money, which have actually harmed the planet and harmed other animals.
Yeah, well, it's not true anyway. Meritocracy is a false idea.
Yeah, it's a false. But you see, the thing is that basically, you know, my view of governments is that governments exist to care for the population, whether it's a government or whether it's any kind of administration or an administrative system. You know, I fundamentally don't agree with nation states. I think they're entities that were set up by violence, and that that I'd like to see a world without nation states, one world, one people. You'd have to have administrative areas in order to kind of administer things, of course, but that wouldn't be the same as a state. And states are entities that have arisen out of violence and are really maintained by violence. And so
we ought to take the idea of a world village seriously.
Yeah. But you see, and so really, but while we have governments, for me, the role of a government is to care for the people and make sure that everyone is provided with the essentials of life, whether it's healthcare, it's food, it's water, it's it's warmth, and those things. That's the kind of that is the task. That is the task of a government. The task of a government isn't to facilitate corporations in exploiting the population for profit, which is what governments do now throughout the world, because that's neoliberalism, that where governments are hand in hand with corporations, and they're very often it's the same people. They're hand in hand in their exploitation of and oppression of the population, in order that a very small percentage of people can get ever richer, on a planet with finite resources. And we can't all be rich. This is the thing, that we can't all aspire to that degree of wealth. There's this fiction that but we could all, if everyone worked hard, we can all be like that. We can all have what the rich people have. No, we can't, because the resources aren't there. We live on a planet with finite resources, and the more we exploit those resources, the more harm we do to other animals, because we harm the natural world that other animals rely on for their existence.
See, Ronnie, you're even causing trouble with your T-shirt. Ronnie, I hate your T-shirt. That chant should be banned from all animal rights marches.
Well, but there isn't a chant on my T-shirt.
Well, it's
just a picture. It's just a picture, isn't it? It's
Yeah, but the slogan that goes with it, don't you?
Well, you see, the human freedom animal rights. I don't particularly like the human freedom aspect of it. I would rather it was something like social justice, because I think freedom, that there is a sense in which humans accord to themselves too much freedom. Depends on the type of freedom you're talking about.
So you'd have social justice and animal rights.
Social justice, animal rights. I would prefer to human freedom, because of human freedom kind of works both ways, and we're humans think, we're free to kind of do whatever we want, and we shouldn't be free to do whatever we want. What we need is freedom from, not freedom to. We need freedom from hunger. We need freedom, from freedom from illness. We need freedom from harmful things, and we need our governments to ensure that we have freedom from those things. By making sure that the basic essentials for human well-being are provided. So freedom from is what's important, but freedom to is can be harmful, because it's like, I'm human, I'm free to do whatever I want, I'm free to exploit, oppress, to harm other humans, other animals. So that's not a good form of freedom, and so that's kind of why I don't really like the human freedom thing.
Well, hi Cliff. I think it's probably Jake Conroy you're thinking of here, rather than Steve, because Steve suggests that all speciesism should be called out wherever it is, and I suppose Jake would say that too. But then you've got the issue of alliance politics, and then you've got the spectre of the way that would play out in modern day thinking about pressure campaigns, for example. And it's there's been a bit of a shift in the movement, Ronnie, in the sense that if we went to an anti-vivisection thing in the 80s, you wouldn't have the same kind of greetings even. People go, hey, how you doing? We're from Nottingham. Oh, I'm from Birmingham. How long have you been vegan? That question wouldn't have been asked then, right? Where it would be now. And I think that's where some of the problem, because the argument is that if we work alongside people who are not yet vegan, that by rubbing shoulders with vegans, and of course we've all got kind of examples of that, right? But it seems to be very problematic within the pressure campaign idea right now than it was back then. There's a shift. There's some variables that have shifted, right?
Well, I think what happened, I mean, back in the day, it was kind of easier in many ways to be an activist than to kind of live socially as a vegan, and so like people became campaigners on single issues, and a lot of people, there's a lot of people in hunt saboteurs that weren't vegan, a lot of people in the anti-vivisection campaigns that weren't vegan, a lot of people campaigning against live exports, which was a big one, and those people weren't vegan. They were against animals being sent to other countries for people to eat while they were kind of, on the demo eating a ham sandwich. You had that. And, those a lot of people kind of became veganized through those campaigns because the vegans involved in those things, actually veganized the non-vegans that became involved and got them to join the dots together, so to speak.
And what if they wouldn't? What happened then?
Well, I don't think they were thrown out of the campaign, because the campaign was on the single issue. The campaign wasn't a campaign for veganism. The campaign was a campaign against, it was like a kind of, a campaign against, hunting, say, if it was the hunt sabs.
Yeah, well, so we're into that problem. You see, this is where Cliff and Jake are different, because, Cliff is based on vegan values, whereas vegan values are a problem for Jake, right? Because it causes this kind of problem within alliance politics, because it means then that this is almost like an entry card, right? And I don't want to speak for him, but I think Cliff would say, well, that's how it should be. That we can only we don't work along exploiters, but it's those exploiters that we want to influence by kind of.
You see, I think the difference, like in terms of, say, you kind of have you have a group of people, say, who are campaigning against vivisection, say like at Camp Beagle, for instance, and there have been people who've gone along to that, people that got their own beagles and are concerned about the beagles being bred for experimentation, so they've gone along there, and quite a few of those people have become vegan because they rub shoulders with the vegans that are there, for instance. But I think even if somebody didn't become vegan, they wouldn't be told to bugger off from the demonstration, you see, because that is a campaign that's focused against animal experimentation, isn't a campaign for veganism, right? The difference between someone like that, but you see a person like that, say a non-vegan person that say joins a campaign against animal experimentation, yeah, they're inconsistent in their attitudes and their behavior towards other animals, but they don't pose a threat to other humans that might join the campaign. Whereas a racist or a sexist that went along there could be viewed by other campaigners as posing a threat, and so would affect the people that join that campaign. And that's the difference between those two things.
Yeah, but the non-vegan who seem to be a bit stuck there. I mean, first of all, you wouldn't want them to be the spokesperson.
No, you would. No, you. Well, you see, because I mean, you see, I think
but Ronnie, that's where you get. I mean, you used to get that with the live exports thing. I mean, like you were talking about the ham sandwiches. You used to get all the capacity world farming people down there, and in between the lorries coming, they were there having the picnic with the ham sandwiches and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
That's right. So, but they would say something like, "Oh, you don't have to be a vegan to care." Now, we're not going to want anybody saying that.
No, you see, and I think this is the problem, because you see why why are those things happening in the first place? You know, why do we have animal experiments, and why do we have live exports, and why do we have fox hunting? You know, we have those things fundamentally because of speciesism and human supremacism. And so, you know, the fundamental way to get rid of all those things is to challenge human supremacism, isn't it? To challenge speciesism. And you can't do that as a non-vegan, can you? You see what I mean? They're part of a, you know, that there's a kind of deeper reason why those things are taking place that has to be challenged. So I think the messaging, you know, the messaging from all these campaigns should actually challenge speciesism and should challenge human supremacism.
It's just weirder now to have non-vegans involved in it than it was. You know, for the reasons that you say. Can we just move on to the second part of this? So someone on the left who persecutes other animals is no better and no worse than someone on the right who exploits other animals. Now, this is where the size of the movement comes in, and another part of Best's argument, which is that we're too small to win. So we have to be involved with the lion's politics, which means that we need to be aligned with other movements. Now, it's a question then of which movements are the ones that we see alliances being fruitful. And of course, it's the other movements that have got the same values that you have. Because the theory then is that if they've already got these progressive values, it's just use that as a catch-all for now, they should be more open to the vegan message, properly understood as veganism, than someone on the right, for example. And so this is why the natural alliance within alliance politics for us, according to Best, would be other people on the left, because it makes sense, because we're already sharing a set of fundamental values, say. It's just that he also says, unfortunately, people on the left are deeply speciesist. So they're deeply speciesist. People on the right are deeply speciesist, but at least the people on the left already share some values with us. And so that's why he would argue that, well, in terms of who are the prospect that we can get to become vegan, surely it's the ones who are already sharing some of our values, as opposed to those who oppose our values. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. I think you're more likely to, it doesn't mean you necessarily would succeed in educating that person to be vegan, but I do think you have got a better chance. You know, you have got a better chance of doing that. And I think if you look at political parties and the makeup, and if you did an analysis of the different political parties and of how many of the people within those parties were actually vegan or consider themselves to be vegan, then I think the parties of the left, you'd have more vegans than the ones on the right. And
it says we're downgrading speciesism. How do we do that? Because I don't see
no,
that.
I don't think we're not downgrading speciesism. I think what we're saying is we're saying that there's kind of pointing out the similarities between speciesism and sexism and racism in that these are all amount to oppression and persecution of others and prejudice against others because those others are different.
Which is exactly what Ryder argued when he coined the phrase.
Yes, that's right. You see, so it's not downgrading speciesism to compare speciesism to racism and sexism. It's not downgrading. It's not downgrading speciesism. I mean, speciesism is kind of in terms of the harm caused. Then speciesism, obviously causes far more harm than any of those other forms of like prejudice and oppression, simply because the number of animals that are kind of slaughtered by humans. It's the form of oppression that causes the most death and suffering. So it's more serious in that way, but it's kind of they're all closely related.
Yeah, Cliff's come back. I'm not quite sure if I understand. The point for me is the fact that if we accept that our movement is not big enough, and the idea is to make the world vegan, so that means that we've got to go through a process of making people not yet vegan, right? And so it's not as though, I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, it's not as though it's just the fact that there's loads of vegans out there that we don't know. There's going to be a lot of people out there that we need to educate on the values of veganism, and then they go, oh right.
But you see, when you know this idea of the idea of allying with people, that it's kind of it surely is, as you say, that you share the same values of those people. When you say that you ally with them, what does that kind of really mean? It's just that you kind of
lines of politics, isn't it? But I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't mean you can't challenge them either, Ronnie.
No, it just means that you share, that I think that the problem with the left isn't that it's left. It's the problem with very many left wing people isn't that they're left wing. It's that they're not left wing enough. Because the kind of most radical kind of position, the most revolutionary position is anti-speciesism, isn't it? It's animal liberation. And so if you get left-wing people that don't accept that, the problem isn't that they're left-wing, it's that they're not left-wing enough.
Yeah, here's another interesting one. We should educate them but never work with them. Now, there's got to be a kind of crossover point. I mean, in the sense that if somebody comes up, you educate them, you're on the street talking to them, and they go, oh, well, will you help me go vegan? That's working with them, isn't it? To some degree, but it's more. I mean, I get Cliff's point in the sense that it's kind of like a amount of time that you give it, kind of thing. How long are you going to stand shoulder to shoulder with somebody who is in Cliff's thing, an animal abuser, animal exploiter?
I mean, is this talking about like getting involved in their campaigns? Is this what this is kind of about when you talk about kind of working with them, that you're kind of, you get involved in the campaign, that there's a kind of left-wing person.
I was thinking it was letting them get involved with ours. Now, the reason that we would get involved with their campaign is because we're anti-racist or we're anti-sexist, not because of them.
But someone who's like considers themselves left wing, but they're still speciesist, they're not going to. What campaigns of ours are they going to get involved in? They're kind of not, are they? Because they're not. They're not going to believe in that, so they're not really going to get involved in
Camp Beagle. You just said that yourself, didn't you?
Yes, but you see, but Camp Beagle isn't a campaign. Camp Beagle isn't like an animal liberation campaign or a vegan campaign. It's a single issue campaign, isn't it? It's not a campaign for veganism. Yeah, but you see, the reason why you kind of the reason why you'd be wary of certain right-wing people getting involved in that campaign is because the effect it would have on other campaigners. It would be for that reason that I've said already, that if someone thinks that there's a person coming along there that might be prejudiced against them, it's going to put those people off from becoming involved in the campaign.
Well, I can hear Cliff typing already, because he's saying, well, the reason that you should reject the non-vegans is because their effect on other animals.
Well,
yes, they're killing them, they're eating them.
Yeah, but you see, the campaign is, the campaign there is very specific. It's it's a campaign to close that place down and to free the beagles. You see. And so it isn't. If it was a campaign for veganism, then it'd be incongruous for non-vegans to be involved in that, wouldn't it? Because they go and need to sort themselves out before they get involved in that campaign. And I do understand the hypocrisy of someone coming along to a campaign against vivisection when that person consumes animals, but it kind of also gives the opportunity to educate that person to become vegan, and a lot of people involved in those single issue campaigns have been educated
We're
to
back.
become
We're
vegan.
back to the time you give them, then, though, Ronnie. You know, you can't just. You see, I mean, Cliff is saying, I won't stand with anybody who harms other animals, right? And I can understand that. At the same time, it's almost as though people have got to kind of go through the process of becoming vegan, completely separate from us, and then they can come in, as though we can't kind of
But you
help them
kind of,
along the way or something.
but if people are part, you see, like for instance, I mean, kind of, you know, we'll do stalls, you know, for our vegan group. We'll do stalls at like dog rescue events, rescue fundraiser events, right? Where, yeah, there's people come along to that care about dogs, but they're still kind of, and sometimes at those events, they'll have a burger van and stuff like that, you know, and kind of have to make sure that
Yeah, but
our
you're
stall
not
is.
standing with them. You're
You're
not
not,
standing with
but
the
what you're
burger van, are
doing,
you?
what you're doing there, you've got people who kind of care about some animals, so you've got something to work with, and you can, you know, you've got something to work with in kind of educating them to make the connection. And I think it's kind of similar with something like Camp Beagle. You've got people that come along to that care about some animals, and so so that's a kind of very similar thing. And so you can then kind of, you know, you've got something to work on in educating them to kind of, you know, respect, you know, have proper respect for all animals.
Yeah, well, there's a direct challenge to you there then. That presumably, did you say dog rescue fundraisers?
Well, they use the money to buy animal flesh for the dogs. Well, I mean, I honestly don't know what what they use the money for, but that's kind of not the issue. And the reason that the reason that we're there is because there are people there who care about some animals. So you've kind of got a bit of a starting point in getting them to, you know, what could be called extend their circle of compassion or extend their circle of respect. If you see what I mean, you know, like you've kind of got probably a better chance with those people than just with someone that doesn't give a shit about any animals at
Well,
all.
yeah, but to go
Yeah.
back to Camp Beagle, then, I mean, how long would you camp there when you're, you know, there's all these kind of flesh munchers and stuff?
Well, I mean, I personally wouldn't camp there at all.
No, but you get the point. I mean, like,
Uh,
how long do you give people? Because I mean, you know, you know, in this day and age, with veganism being so kind of prominent, does it make sense to be anti-vivisection and not vegan anymore? It used to, I
well,
know,
it
but
doesn't. I mean, no. I mean, and it kind of no. It never made any sense anyway. You know.
no. Oh, it makes less sense now, doesn't it? I mean,
Well, I
we didn't
think
even
it
know about
kind of
veganism then.
it's kind of, you wonder more why the people aren't vegan, because it's kind of it's so much easier now to kind of, you know, live in society as a vegan, you know. So it's not that there's, you know, not that they've never made a difference to me, but you know, with some people that kind of, you know, they
But
see that as
you're
a
kind
different.
of making Cliff's point now, because it's kind of like more kind of unreasonable for them not
Yeah,
to be
but you see
vegan.
what you see. The thing is that, you see, if that campaign is set up with a very specific objective, and it's saying, well, you know, we're here because we want this place closed down, and we want those dogs, you know, to be kind of freed from that place, to be rescued, whatever. Now, I think there's a whole, you know, there's a whole conversation to be had about that, and the validity of all that, and we've had that before. But just taking that as it is, that's what it is. And so they're going to have anyone along to that kind of that shares that view. You know, they're not going to, you know, they may want those people to be vegan, but they're not going to say, well, if you're not vegan, you can't come along, because the campaign isn't about veganism. It's about a very, very specific, you know, single issue, or a single aspect of a single issue, isn't it? And that's the thing.
Yeah. So again, Cliff, this campaign is basically saying, I mean, we've said this. This is one of our critiques of it.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, the you know, I mean, I think that the fundamental way to combat animal experimentation is to educate people to go vegan. You know, that's my view. You've got to go right to the kind of, you know.
Well, going back to where we were in the glorious vision of the vegans, the fundamental way of tackling anything is for everybody to go vegan, because, you know,
Yeah.
if we take Cross and Watson seriously, and obviously we don't like words like panacea, but it is kind of presented as that, as kind of like the solution, and we might have qualms about that, but if you take their values seriously, then there's nothing better than that, than people going vegan for whatever injustice that they oppose.
But well, no. Oops. The microphone got a life of its own now.
Just trying to get away from you.
Probably has had enough of my voice. Don't blame it, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, yes, basically, I think that's the most important thing that we can do, is to like educate other people to go vegan, because until we have at least a substantial minority of a large minority of people that accept vegan values, then we're never gonna we aren't gonna achieve animal liberation.
Yeah, you see, for me, what you've just said means that I wouldn't go to Camp Beagle.
No. Well, I kind of I totally understand that. Yeah, because you'd be wanting to focus on vegan education, and I totally understand that.
Well, but then you say, given what you've just said, if I went to Camp Beagle and did my vegan education there as well as the Beagle stuff, well, because they care about other animals a little bit already, then are we in that thing about, well, they should be more receptive than just the random people you meet on the high street?
Yeah, yes, and I think that's true. I mean, there are a lot of people that have gone to Camp Beagle just because they cared about beagles, and then they've ended up going vegan. You know, there's quite a number of people where that's happened.
Yeah, but is that an answer to Cliff, that's one reason why you should, for whatever your time scale is comfortable with you, stand with or be with non-vegans, at least for
well, we always have to have a communication with non-vegans, because otherwise how are we going to educate anyone to become vegan? And if you're doing something in the street, then all the time you're having conversations with non-vegans. You know, what you're doing in a situation like going to Camp Beagle, or you're going to a dog rescue event, or you're going to an event, an environmental event, is you're doing exactly the same as what you'd do on the street, except you're probably maybe talking to people that you've got a better chance of successfully educating.
Yeah, well, this is what's being said about Has Vegan here, kind of if they're passionate about some issue, then, maybe. But, I mean, Cliff is saying people at Camp Beagle 100%. See, that would make me less wanting to go there than ever.
Well, you see, I think it kind of depends on sort of what Cliff means by that, and perhaps he could elaborate. That does he mean that he's spoken to non-vegans at Camp Beagle and they've steadfastly refused to go vegan, or has he spoken to vegans at Camp Beagle that are steadfastly, are refusing to educate other people to go vegan? If you see what I mean. Because there kind of is a little bit that aspect of it. Oh, don't talk about veganism because this isn't what this is to do.
Well,
with.
We're more into the Jake territory there, aren't we? Yeah,
coming from vegans. Yeah.
So, I think that's a contradiction, isn't it? Kind of, don't talk about veganism because you'll put people off. But if we and they campaign together, they'll rub shoulders with vegans, and then they'll become vegan. Well, how can you do that if you don't even talk about it?
Yeah. And then we're also back to what's the fundamental way in which we kind of end animal experimentation, and that is through educating people to go vegan. So it has to be really a vital component of that campaign.
Yeah. Well, I mean, David, I would say that cultural speciesism is very deep, and you know, some people will pick out different particular things for particular reasons. I mean, we've already suggested, haven't we, that Camp Beagle got a lot of dog lovers there, right? Well, I mean, that's nothing to do with veganism.
Well, I think what you've got at Camp Beagle, I think you've got you know all the kind of main people at Camp Beagle. I mean, I'd say certainly now are vegan, and some of them have been vegan for years and years and years and years. You know, the ones that are kind of the ones that kind of head up the campaign, so to speak.
And
And I think
so how do they articulate their veganism at Camp Beagle, or don't they?
well, to be quite honest, I don't really know because I've not really spent enough time there to kind of really know. But I think that you see, I know they've had vegan booklets. That they've got a place there with different booklets and leaflets, and they've got vegan information there, for instance, that people can take away. So so the kind of is that.
So Ronnie, that if you imagine you're there, right, and people come, they seem interested, they go away, and they come back again, and 3 months later they're still not vegan. What do you make of them then?
Well, probably not a lot, but historically we've kind of always had this. I mean, like when I was involved in running a hunt sub group in North London, which was way back in the kind of late 70s, we had a big influx at the time of people into the hunt subs, and we were having new members all the time, and invariably they weren't vegan, and most of the time they kind of poo-pooed veganism. They, when we said they were vegan, that we were vegan, they'd say, "I'm not interested in that. I just want to save the fox. I'm not interested in the vegan. I like my meat and all that." But in most cases, within 2 or 3 weeks, they become vegan because we talk to them about veganism and the reasons for it.
Or they drop out, presumably, as an alternative.
Oh, some would drop out. You get the occasional one that steadfastly refused to become vegan. You would get that, but then it's like a question of like what happens, because you see that person can still come along and come out and save the life of a fox or a hare or whatever. So do you kind of exclude them from doing that? Because that was very specific. The hunt subs isn't about isn't about those people were kind of educated to become vegan as a kind of like as a sort of that wasn't the aim of the hunt subs group, to educate people to become vegan, but they became vegan because
so I mean, are you talking yourself into a bit more acceptance of Jake's position then? Because
no. That I see that as a kind of separate issue. I'm just talking about like the kind of what tends to happen with single issue campaigns, how people can become veganized through involvement in single issue campaigns by rubbing shoulders with vegans that are already involved in those campaigns. Because increasingly now,
worthwhile then.
Well, it kind of I think in terms of what we should I suppose in a sense kind of be focusing on, you've got to kind of look wider than that, because the only people there that you're educating to go vegan are the people that come along and become involved in the campaign. But what about the vast majority of the population that aren't the people that would go along and get involved in the campaign?
Well, those people are from the population, aren't they? They don't come up from Mars or anything.
No, they're part. Yeah, they are from the population, but the vast majority of the population aren't going to go to Camp Beagle, aren't going to get involved in hunt subs.
No, that's just a numbers thing. It's like saying if we're down in central Dublin, we're not talking to the vast majority of the population. We're just talking to the people.
But what I'm saying is that if you're just relying on single issue campaigns run by vegans to spread veganism, then it's not going to spread it very far, because you have to kind of because that's only a very small number of non-vegans will actually get involved in those campaigns. If we want to reach the majority of the non-vegans, we've got to have widespread vegan outreach. We've got to go to where those people actually live, to do our outreach. That's the kind of way. You can't rely on single issue campaigns as a way of veganizing, veganizing the world, because that's not, that's only going to reach a very small number of people.
Yeah, well, I'm not I'm not going to disagree with you. I was just playing devil's advocate there, but I guess I agree with you, obviously. But you know, I mean, I suppose Jake's idea would be almost like veganism through the back door, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's not. You're only going to veganize a small number of people. And like, if we're going to change the culture of society, we're going to change the politics. We've got to veganize a substantial minority. You're not going to do that through through.
And have you got any ideas how we might be able to do that, Ronnie?
Well, yes. I mean, I think we need vegan education everywhere as much as possible. Everyone can do a bit of that themselves. Leaving leaflets places and just listen to any of our other shows. And I'm saying this all the time. But we need, we need. I think we need what I would call community vegan education. In other words, that people think about how they can kind of veganize their local community, because I think a lot of people think that think as vegan education as just being something like the Cube of Truth, Earthling's Experience, something like that takes place in the center of a big city. That tends to be how outreach is looked at, whereas we need vegan outreach everywhere. And vegans really need to think about how can I veganize the area in which I live. In some places possible to do that through like door drop-in, organising information stalls at community events or in the street of your local town. But think about where kind of where you actually live, because non-vegans are everywhere, and we need vegans everywhere to veganize their communities.
We do. Well, look, it's taken us 2 hours, but we finally got we got to your trademark.
As long as, I think some people stayed, or have they kind of got to sleep?
No,
I know. I need another cup of tea. I do
there's
now.
30 people watching, but I think
that's good. I think it's I mean, I think it's like an important topic. I think there's various ways in which people who claim to be vegans don't understand what veganism means. I think a lot of people who kind of claim to be animal liberationists don't really understand what animal liberation truly involves.
I think you and Cliff on this one are pretty close, in the sense that you've got great success talking to the general public, but talking about veganism at single issue events goes down like a lead balloon, which is why Jake says don't do that, because it will do it, right?
I'm just wondering whether does it go down with a lead balloon with the organisers of those events, or does it go down like a lead balloon with the people taking part in those events? In other words, is it the organisers that don't want you to talk about veganism, or is it that there's a lot of non-vegans there that don't want to hear about veganism?
It used to be. I mean, Francione used to say this, is that it used to be that the organisers, say outside a fur shop, they wouldn't want you to talk about anything else.
But I think
that's changed now, isn't it?
But I think you have to relate it. You see, I've done a talk at Camp Vegan, and I spoke at Camp Beagle, and I spoke about veganism. I said that the fundamental solution to this is veganism. Because how are we going to, and the very practical reason for that is because, that if that campaign ever looked like, if you really looked like there was going to be a really successful campaign against animal experimentation, then it would be crushed by the state as it was before. And so if you don't want it to be crushed by the state, you've got to change the nature of the state by changing the politicians. And who's going to vote for the politicians? That's ordinary people. And so if you're going to get the right sort of politician, you've got to veganize loads of people. Otherwise, we're going to carry on getting the same as we've had all the time anyway. So, that's a very practical reason, why if we want to...
I've been wondering when you're going to say that, Ronnie.
Yeah. But you see, that's right. So yeah, I'll say that. That's if I give a talk at an anti-vivisection event, yes, I will say that vegan education is a fundamental way to kind of end animal experimentation. I will say that, and it kind of doesn't go down like a lead balloon. It doesn't. People will how can people argue with it? It's so logical, isn't it? How can anyone dispute it? They can't, can they? Is there a logical way that they could dispute that argument? I don't think so.
No, well, I'm with you on that as well, because I mean it's kind of an obvious thing, especially for us nowadays, to say that kind of thing. Right, we've been 2 hours and 20, Ronnie. Would you agree?
I think this is the longest. This is
The longest ever. Yeah. So
past my bedtime soon.
you need to get your jams on, do you?
Oh no, I don't bother with them.
No.
Does anyone wear jams these days? Do you wear jams, Roger?
No. I ain't got any.
No, I don't think people do.
No. Ain't got any.
Yeah. Although it could, I ought to kind of probably wear them, because we sleep with a cat in the bed, and they've got kind of quite sharp claws, haven't they? So I do worry.
Yeah. I could hardly get into bed the other day. I mean, Roger is, yay big, like the size of a loaf, and yet she seems to be able to fill an entire bed somehow. I don't know how she does it. But,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, but, yeah.
Oh, it's Jim Jams, not Jam. Yeah, that's what that is.
Jim Jam. It's Jam Jams. I don't know what Jams are.
No,
Jim Jams.
Jams.
It's Jim Jams. That's
Jam
right.
Jams.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. What? Yeah, Jams. Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay, folks. So thanks ever so much for sticking with us for this length of time, and we shall see you again next time, providing, Ronnie, that
we are still alive.